back to the Rugby League History channel. Today I'll be doing a ranking video, and this one is going to be ranking all the 17 NRL clubs and organisations. So I'm going to be ranking them from worst till best. This video idea is not an original idea. I watch a lot of YouTube channels, as you all know, and I'm always looking for new videos to watch, and I come across this video from a YouTuber who did a video ranking all the 17 NRL organisations from worst to best, and let's just say I agreed with some of the stuff that they said, but some of the other things that they put in there, well, it just goes to show that just because you've got a massive following on social media and you've got a lot of followers, it doesn't therefore equate to knowledge on rugby league and how things go and how things work. So I'm going to be doing my own ranking video today, and it's going to be factual. I'm going to be looking at the histories of the club, how they're run now, recent successes, everything. I'm going to be going through it with a fine-tooth comb. So let's start off with who I think are the worst NRL organisation, and we're going to work our way up to the top. And also for this list, what I'll do is I'll rank the teams from worst, as I just mentioned before, to best. So I'm going to put them as worst, below average, average, good, excellent, and then elite, and that's going to be the categories I'm going to have in this video. So coming in as the worst organisation or club in the NRL, who I believe currently is the West Tigers. The club has the longest finals drought in the NRL currently, and one of the longest finals drought in the history of the game. The club has only won just the one premiership in 2005, and they've only made the finals 3 times since the merger began in 2000. Especially over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of coaching swaps. There's been a lot of issues with the board, which seem to have finally been fixed, with Lee Hanjipatelis and Justin Pascoe being removed from their positions. There's been a lot of issues with player retention and recruitment. We've seen lots of players from the club come and go, and a lot of them have gone on to do better and bigger things, and the players that they've brought in to replace them haven't really aimed up, and there's been a lot of bad signings by the club. Also, there's been a lot of issues behind the scenes because it's a merged club between Western Suburbs and Balmain. Obviously, in the last 10 to 15 years, the Balmain sides had a lot of financial problems, whether it be with the Leeds club or other means, and Western Suburbs have had to pick up the slack. And now, when it comes to the merger, I think they've got 90% of that said merger, and Balmain only have 10%. There's also the issue with identity. The club continues to play matches at 2 home grounds, and also when it comes to the new Centre of Excellence that they've opened in the last couple of years, they've decided to put it at Concord when a lot of people have said that it should have been in the Macarthur region. I guess one shining light for the club is the fact that the fans have stood by the team and the club, even though it's been really hard over the last 10 years. And in terms of memberships, they've actually got more memberships on the NRL.com website, from what I can see, than the Sydney Roosters and Newcastle. So even though they've got back-to-back wooden spoons and haven't played finals for 10 years, they've still got more memberships than both of them clubs. But at the end of the day, with West Tigers, they've kind of become a bit of a meme club, a bit of a joke club currently, whether it be the 9th place finishes, the back-to-back wooden spoons, other issues surrounding the club. So definitely at present, they're the worst team in the NRL, worst club in the NRL, how they run. But as the old saying is, the only way is up, and we'll have to see how they go under Benji Marshall and this new regime. The clubs in below average, I'm going to start off with St George. With St George, since the joint venture started in '99, the club's made the 2 grand finals with the 1 premiership victory in 2010 under Wayne Bennett. Since then, things haven't been great since Wayne Bennett left the club. In the last decade or so, the club has only made the finals 2 or 3 times. There's been multiple issues off the field with who's running the club. Then they've got also the Illawarra side of the joint venture that could no longer fund their part, so they were bought out by Wynn Corporation. So the club is 50% St George and 50% Wynn Corporation. There's also been a high player turnover. A lot of the players that they've bought in, retention recruitment hasn't been great. The players haven't really hit the mark as the club had wanted them to. However, they could be turning the corner with the introduction of Shane Flanagan as head coach. He's a proven winner, got Cronulla their first premiership. If I were to judge them off the first tenure that they were in the NRL as a joint venture, I'd have to put them a lot higher, but with the way that they're going currently, it's not good. Also, I've noticed that crowd numbers have dropped at games. Memberships of St George are not very high. Last time I checked, it was around about 13 to 14,000, which isn't particularly good. Now, don't get me wrong, St George do have a big fan base, but I can understand why a lot of fans are keeping away from the club at the moment. It's a very tough watch, especially for a club that historically, when they were St George, just on their own, were very successful. One of the most iconic brands in Australian sport with the Red V and the Dragons and all that type of stuff, but it's going to be a long way back for St George, so I'm going to have to put them in below average currently as an organisation. And the other club I'm going to put in below average is the Gold Coast. This is the fifth incarnation of the Gold Coast. This is their fifth go at having a team. As you can see, they had the Giants, Seagulls, Gladiators, Chargers and now Titans. Historically, the Gold Coast area for any sport, it's been a graveyard. It's been described that by the media and by people out there that sporting teams on the Gold Coast do not do too well, and that also factors in the Gold Coast Titans as they are now. Since coming into the competition in 2007, they've only made the finals 4 times, 2 of them by default. They've made no grand final appearances, they've won no premierships. Financially off the pitch for a long time, they struggled. By, I think in 2013, they were over 30 million Australian dollars in debt. The NRL came in and with a bit of a contingency plan, they managed to solve that debt. They also had a couple of issues with players off the field. They had a cocaine scandal. There's a couple of wooden spoons thrown in there as well, some very mediocre seasons. One thing that the Gold Coast managed to do quite well in though is attract talent. I think it's mainly to do with the lifestyle that they have on the Gold Coast there, but they managed to attract talent, some big names. However, it seems most of the time the big names that do go there don't really produce, and they have had some issues with recruitment and the retention as well, along with a few coaches thrown in there as well that have gone in, tried to change things but haven't managed to do so. If I were to do this video a couple of years earlier, I probably would have put the Gold Coast as the worst club in the NRL, but West Tigers have taken that mantle from them. They've got Des Hasler coming in as the new head coach. He's a proven winner. Can he be the first person in Gold Coast history to finally turn things around for the club and get them into a grand final and win a premiership? Who knows, but in terms of success on the field, it's been lacking. Also, off the field, the club has struggled to attract fans and memberships because, once again, as I was looking on NRL.com, the Gold Coast have the lowest memberships in the NRL. I don't even think they've got 10,000 members, and when it comes to their support at the home stadiums, I noticed that there's actually more away fans in the ground than home fans. So as a club, they're not very well supported, home or away. Okay, so in the average section, the first club I'm going to put in there is Canberra. The club was founded in 1982. They've got the 3 premierships, the last of which were in 1994. Since the NRL era, Canberra have made final series more often than not. They certainly haven't been a club struggling towards the bottom of the table. They did make the one grand final in 2019 where they got very close to winning the premiership. When it comes to player retention and recruitment, they're not too bad. They have signed some good players in the past that have done really well for the club. Off the field, they do have some issues. I remember doing a video about the worst behaved clubs in the NRL, and I think Canberra was 4th. They do seem to have a lot of off-field issues throughout their history, mainly involving alcohol. In saying that though, I think the club's run pretty well, but to me they're kind of just middle of the road. Besides sort of 2016 and 2019, the club hasn't really seriously challenged for the premiership since the mid-1990s, and they haven't really managed to replace the players that they had back then. It's very similar to another club I'm going to be mentioning on this list later on, but it just seems that they've struggled to replicate what happened in the glory days. Also, I think in terms of coaching, it's going to be Ricky Stuart's 10th year at Canberra, and he's failed to deliver them a premiership yet, and yet he's still there. So maybe going down the line somewhere, the club will have to look at replacing Ricky Stuart as head coach. But as I said, they're not an excellent organisation. They're not a bad organisation for me. As a club, they're just kind of middle of the road. In terms of memberships and crowd numbers, I'd say that they're average. I wouldn't say that they're great. However, I will say that when Canberra are doing well, they can sell out their stadium easy. But most of the time, I'd just say that the crowds that they get, the memberships that they have, it's average. Once again, if you disagree with me, Canberra fans, let me know in the comment section below. But I just kind of see Canberra as just sort of like an average club. The second team I'm putting in the average section, this one will probably upset a couple of people, is Newcastle. The club has won 2 premierships in 1997 and 2001, and in both of those grand finals they weren't the favourite to win the premiership in that decider. Since the NRL era began though in 1998, the club has finished last 4 times, which is more than any other team in the NRL era, including that year in 2016. I think they only won just 1 match. And I think part of the reason is because of the ownership that the club had, especially during the 2010s. It weren't great. They had Nathan Tinkler in there involved, and things were not very good for a long time at a board level at Newcastle. However, it seems that they've rectified that in probably the last 2 or 3 years. They're slowly starting to get back on track again. On field, the club hasn't been great for, you could say, quite a while. They haven't been a genuine premiership threat for a while. Since they won in 2001, they've only made 1 preliminary final since, which happened in 2013. Other than that, they've either, when they've made the finals, they've been knocked out at the first week, with the exception of last season where they made the semi-final against New Zealand, or they've missed out on the finals altogether. Also, the player retention and recruitment at the club, it's been sort of hit and miss. They've signed some players where it's worked, and they've signed some players where it hasn't worked. But I think especially in the last couple of years, they've slowly started to get things right off the field and on the field, and you can see it this year where they made the finals and made the second week of the finals. One thing I will say that Newcastle excel at though is the players that they do produce, because it's a rugby league mad area, and also the fact that the supporters, even though the club has struggled for a few years, they still get some great attendances there. The memberships are not the highest, but they're up there, and I think that's the supporters of the club. They've got one of the best fan bases in terms of showing up to games in the entire league, so from that perspective they're great, but there's other things that need work, so I'd put them in the average section at the moment as a club and an organisation. Last team that I'm going to put in average is another one that might upset some people. It's the New Zealand Warriors, or as they were founded in 1995, Auckland Warriors. The club has not won a premiership yet. They were admitted in 1995, so it's coming up to 30 years without their first premiership. They've made 2 grand finals, 2002 and 2011. They lost both of those, however they weren't the favourite in either of those, and they've got the 1 minor premiership in 2002. A little fact that people might not know, at the end of the 2000 NRL season, Auckland actually went insolvent, and if it weren't for someone coming in and buying the club, they would have folded, but someone did, and they were rebranded as New Zealand Warriors. Now, their history is kind of, as an organisation, I'd say it's average. They've made the finals 9 times since coming into the competition. They've had some really, really good seasons. They've had some very mediocre seasons. In the last 10 years, however, I think that the club has really struggled. They've only made the finals twice since making that grand final in 2011. everyone's going to be thinking, oh, but what about last year? And I'm thinking, well, last year was just that. It was just the 1 year. And for me, if they would be higher on this list, they'd have to finish and be more consistent on the table. I think in terms of support and attendances at their games, I think they're kind of sort of average. They're not great, they're not bad. I'm looking at the memberships. For the last couple of years, New Zealand haven't supplied the membership numbers for what they get, so I don't know how many members they do have. When it comes to player retention and recruitment, the club is hit and miss. Like I mentioned with Newcastle, they have recruited some players that have done quite well. They've also recruited some players that haven't done well. They've also gone through a few coaches. A few of them have been really poor, like the likes of Stephen Kearney. And they've had some really good ones, like the one that they've just got last year in Webster. So I think with New Zealand, they're a very inconsistent team. As an organisation, I'd say they're kind of middle of the road. I wouldn't say that they're bad, I wouldn't say that they're great. So there is room for improvement for New Zealand. Moving into the good category now, and the first team I'm going to talk about is North Queensland. I think that North Queensland are a good organisation / club, founded in 1995. In the early days, yes, they did struggle on the pitch there. They got 3 wooden spoons and they didn't make their first finals series until 2004, but since then they've improved as a club and as an organisation. The club, of course, just have the one premiership, which they won in 2015, and they finished runners-up on 2 other occasions in 2005 and 2017. In the last 10 to 15 years, for the most part, the club has made the finals and has been competitive. They've had a couple of ordinary seasons as well, but I think the way the club's run very well, especially with the off-field stuff. You never really hear too much off-field problems from the North Queensland side. In terms of their fan base, they've got one of the most passionate fan bases. You could also say that they've got one of the best attendances in the league. I remember even when they were struggling in the 1990s, they got better attendances than most clubs. I think in regards to their retention and recruitment and how they do things in that regard is quite good. They are good at identifying talent. Yes, there has been a couple of flops here and there, but on the whole, their recruitment's great, and whoever managed to sign Jonathan Thurston, whoever managed to convince him to go up there, that proved to be a masterstroke, same as Jason Taumalolo and players like that. Also, because it's a rugby league mad area, they produce a lot of talent themselves up that way. In the last couple of years, they've also upgraded their stadium. They've moved from Dairy Farmers Stadium / 1300 Smile Stadium to the brand new Queensland Country Bank Stadium, which looks like a decent ground. So in terms of the club overall, I think in the early days, yes, they did struggle, but they managed to find their feet in the NRL, and for the most part, they've been a good organisation club, especially you could say in the last 10 to 15 years or so. So North Queensland goes in the good category. The second club that I've got in the good category is Canterbury Bankstown. Founded in 1935, the club's one of the oldest in the league still going, and they've won 8 premierships, with their last coming in 2004. They've also finished in the NRL ever at least, runners up in 98, 2012 and 2014. In terms of fan base and memberships, out of the Sydney clubs, I think they're ranked 3rd or 4th highest for memberships and crowds, even though in the last, you could say since 2016, things haven't been good for the club. On and off the field, they've struggled. They've had the wrong people in charge. They've had the salary cap issues, which have damaged the club in terms of trying to sign people. That culminated with a wooden spoon in 2021. So you can see up until about 2014, 2015, if I were to do the video back then, Canterbury would have been rated a lot higher, but the last few years have really dragged the club down, in my personal opinion anyway. I know that Phil Gould and the like are doing their best to try to rebuild the club and trying to get them back into the finals. In terms of their junior development and their lower grades, Canterbury is very strong in that regard. won the New South Wales Cup quite a few times. They've also won the lower leagues besides that, Harold Matthews, SG Ball. They have produced some players in the past which have been very, very good. In terms of their retention and recruitment, over the last 10 years or so, it hasn't been that great. I've read a few stories where they've let certain players go who they've said you're not good enough, and then you find out that they used to be at Canterbury and now they're doing well at somewhere else. Some of the players they've brought in the last 10 years or so haven't been that great. They're certainly not the club that I think that they once were, but as I said, Phil Gould's working his best to try to get the club and the entire organisation are trying their best to get them back to where they should be. Off the field, in the past, their image has taken a bit of a hit. Of course, you had the 2002 salary cap drama, and then you've had the Coffs Harbour thing, and there's been a couple of off-field things as well with some players, but I think overall Canterbury is a good club, good organisation, but they're just doing it a bit tough at the moment. And the last team that I'm going to be putting in the good category is Cronulla. Now, some people might see this as a bit of a shock, and when I was watching the other person's video, he put them in the just getting by category. When it comes to on-field success, Cronulla only have the one premiership, as we all know, when they beat Melbourne in 2016. Besides that, they came close on one or two occasions, 73 and 78 against Manly, and then 1997 against Brisbane. And for most of their history, you can see up until the early 2010s, they were a club that struggled financially. I think in the early 80s, they were one of the clubs that nearly got thrown out the league, along with Newtown and Western Suburbs. And I remember towards the late 2000s, early 2010s, there was talk about them being relocated to either Queensland, Central Coast, one of those areas. And whenever it come up to which Sydney club was going to go next, a lot of people were always pointing in Cronulla's direction. But since the Woolooware development were announced, and because Cronulla own their own ground, we always knew that they were going to get a lot of money from that. It was going to be financially good for the club, and once it's all complete, they're going to be one of the wealthiest clubs going. In terms of on-field performance in the last 10 years or so, you can see that Cronulla's been quite good. I think in the last 10 years, they've only missed the finals twice. They got that premiership in 2016. They've been competitive throughout. Off the field, they're doing all the right moves. Yes, there's been some delays in getting the stadium done, getting the Leagues Club back up, but once those are done, there should be no worries there. In terms of their recruitment and player retention, I think that they do quite well in there. They've signed some good players. Also, they've got an arrangement with Newtown in the New South Wales Cup, where they put a lot of their younger players or people that can't be at the NRL in there, and that side in the New South Wales Cup for Newtown has been quite successful over the last couple of years. I also think in other times in their history, especially in the early days of the NRL, they were quite a competitive force, won a minor premiership, got to do a couple of preliminary finals. They have had some dull periods in their history, but I think even though they've only got the one premiership, they have come close on a few occasions and they have made a few final series. In terms of their fans and their membership base, the club has always had a smaller fan base compared to other Sydney clubs and across the NRL, and I think besides Manly and the Gold Coast, they've got one of the lowest membership counts. But I think when you look at the area, the size of that Cronulla area, the Shire, it's not the biggest area in the world, so you can kind of see why they don't have the biggest fan base, coupled in with the fact that they've only got the one premiership. But I think as an organisation, especially over the last 10 years, they've made a lot of improvements, especially financially, because at one stage it looked like relocation was definitely on the cards. Now we get into the great category, and the first team is Manly. So with Manly, they've won 8 premierships since they've come into the competition in 1947, and they've never come last. Another thing with Manly that makes them great as an organisation is that every decade since the 1970s they've won at least one premiership. So if trends continue, sometime between now and the end of probably 2030, 2029, they should have at least won another premiership. There isn't too many blips on Manly's record as an organisation, except for probably the late 90s. They didn't meet the criteria for the NRL and they had to merge with North Sydney, but they managed to buy back the licence and re-enter the competition as Manly. And also probably, I remember a few years ago they got done for the salary cap. They were over the salary cap for about 5 years. They had to pay a fine, but for whatever reason they didn't get any points deducted for that issue. Behind the scenes, they're backed by the wealthy Penn family, and also in the past Max Delmage, who also has a bit of money behind him. He's been involved in the club. They've never really struggled to attract players. They've always managed to get high profile players, especially from other clubs. In some ways, when it comes to their junior development and junior teams, they're not the best, but when it comes to retention and recruitment, actually getting players into the club, they've always managed to succeed in that regard. In terms of a club itself, I'd say they're one of the most successful in the NRL, and I'd say that probably out of all the Sydney clubs, they're one of the most successful as well historically. So Manly is a great organisation. Their ground, their stadium, does need a little bit of work. They have gone in some ways to fixing that by building a new grandstand, which looks really good, but we'll have to see how they go in 2024. But rate them as an organisation, as a club, I think they're a great club. The second club in the great category as an organisation, South Sydney. South Sydney are the most successful club in Australian rugby league history. They've won 21 first grade premierships, with the last coming in 2014, and it just goes to show how successful they were as a club back in the day, when they've only won just the one premiership in the last 53 years. However, they're still miles ahead of the second or third place team on the all-time list. South Sydney are one of the most iconic brands in Australian sport. The Rabbitoh is synonymous with South. The red and green jersey, you've got the random South guy. You see people wearing South shirts all over the world. They're one of the most followed clubs in the NRL. I think for a long time there, they had the most memberships out of any Sydney club, and I think for a long time they were only just behind Brisbane for the amount of memberships. They also have in some seasons some of the best attendances in the league, and the best attendances out of any of the Sydney teams. Financially, behind the scenes, South Sydney are backed by Russell Crowe. Is one of the part owners. It used to be Holmes Acart that was with him, but he relinquished his part of the agreement, and now it's James Packer's in there. We all know who he is. And then also there's an IT billionaire who's got a park stake in the club as well. So with the other YouTuber that when I watched his video on ranking organisations, he ranked South as just getting by. Well, if you've got a billionaire in there with the part share of your club, you're just not just getting by. Just recently, South relocated their operations training base, all that caper, to Maroubra Heffron Park over from Redfern Oval. It's a state-of-the-art facility. I think the club's doing a lot of good things on and off the field, especially over the last 10 years. How many preliminary finals have they made? They've made 2 grand finals, got the 1 premiership. They've come a long way since when I was growing up. South Sydney used to be a club that, especially in the 1990s and early 2000s, really struggled. Of course, they got kicked out of the NRL for not meeting the criteria. Then they took the NRL to court, got put back in, which I think were the correct decision. So yeah, they're one of the biggest clubs in the NRL and one of the biggest clubs in Sydney, well run on and off the field. And yeah, South Sydney's a great organisation. The third organisation in the great category, Parramatta. Now this might be a controversial pick for some people out there, but with Parramatta, you just look at the facts with the club. It did take them a long time to get going, I will admit that. It did take the club a long time to find their feet in the New South Wales Rugby League. It weren't until the mid-1970s that the club became sort of a real force in the competition. Obviously the glory period was from 75 to 86, where they made 7 grand finals and won 4 of those, and Also claimed a few other honours, had some of the best players in the league: Sterling, Kenny, Ray Price, Mick Cronin, the list goes on. Since then, the club's had some successful periods without winning a premiership, but yet that elusive premiership still follows them. It's coming up to 38 year now, and for a club the size of Parramatta, that's just ridiculous how it's got to that stage. But they have one of the longest premiership droughts in the history of the competition. Of course, they come very close in the late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, and then there was a period where the club once again really struggled. They had salary cap issues for third-party payments, and had the 2016 salary cap scandal. And then it's been a bit of a slow rebuild, but especially over the last 5 or 6 years, the club has been quite competitive again. Made the grand final in 2022. In terms of the club off the field, the club is well run now, got a very stable board. It's one of the richest clubs in the NRL and generates the most money, especially all that money going through the leagues club. As a sort of a junior base and producing players, the club is one of the most successful in doing that. They're the most successful team in Harold Matthews and SG Ball. There's so many players that even at other clubs, when you trace back to where they're from, they're all from sort of the Parramatta region. There's lots and lots of ex-Parramatta players. When it comes to membership and supporters, I think the club overtook South Sydney 2 years ago as having the most memberships out of any Sydney NRL team, and they've got some of the best attendances in the league. The club is also relocating, or they have already relocated to the new Kellyville facility. That's a state-of-the-art training facility, and it's supposedly meant to be one of the best in the country. So there's a lot of good stuff happening off the field for Parramatta. On the field, things have been up and down, but mainly good. I mean, there was a really dark time during the 2010s there, early part with the wooden spoons and that, but financially they're fine, stable board. The only thing that people just keep going back to is the premiership drought. I think if Parramatta had one or two premierships, they'd be a lot higher in other people's minds, but obviously these days people don't look at everything else, they just look at how many premierships you won. So the other YouTuber said that Parramatta is the worst run club and worst team in the NRL, but they didn't factor in all these things that I've mentioned. As I said, financially, things going off the field, the board, supporters and everything like that, they're one of the best. And in 2019, the club moved to the brand new Western Sydney Stadium, state-of-the-art ground, reportedly one of the best in the league. So there's a lot of good things happening for Parramatta, but unfortunately just that premiership drought. Eventually one day they probably will win a premiership, but until they do, it's just going to be the same old thing on social media from the other fans. And of course they're going to mention the wooden spoons as well, but 11 of them were before 1972, so in the last 50 years the club's only come last 3 times, which is pretty average compared to the other teams. Other teams have got the same amount of wooden spoons. And the last of the clubs in the great category, I've got, this one's going to shock a few people, Redcliffe, or the Dolphins. Now some people might go, they've only been in the competition for a year, how can you put them so highly, how can you judge them just based on that year? Well, technically, even though it's their first year in the NRL, it's not their first year as a club, because they were founded in 1947, and up until last year they played in the Queensland Cup, and they were a very successful Queensland Cup side, and there's a reason why they were given the 17th team in the NRL's licence. The club has a very strong financial backing. The club, surprisingly, even though it's their first year in the NRL as of last year, they've got one of the biggest membership bases already. They've got over 28,000 members. And the fact as well that they're one of only 2 teams, the other one being Cronulla, that own their stadium at Martin Bay there. I think that's where it's located. they're set up good for the future. On top of that, they managed to get Wayne Bennett as their inaugural head coach. After that, they've got Christian Wolff, who was very successful with St Helens. He's a good coach, and I think they've got a really good platform for the future. Now, if they were a brand new team and they'd never played anywhere before, like if they were just a brand new invention, I wouldn't have them on the list, but I'm basing this mainly off the fact that they were a very successful Queensland Cup side, and now they've moved up to the NRL, and I think long term Redcliffe are going to be a success in the NRL. And now we move into the elite category, and the first team is Penrith. Now, if I were doing this video before 2020, I would have put Penrith in average, but the last 3 years they've risen up to the elite level. And I don't really have to go into too much detail as to why they're elite. But besides the obvious stuff, behind the scenes the club is very well run. They're financially very well backed by the Panthers Leagues Club. In terms of support, they do have a bit of support, not as big as some of the other Sydney teams. I wouldn't say that they're on the same level as Parramatta, South or Canterbury, but they've certainly got some supporters. They've got a decent stadium, which I think is getting redeveloped as well. So yeah, definitely I'd put them in elite. Of course, Penrith had a rough start to their time in the New South Wales Rugby League Premiership and the NRL. It took them nearly 20 years to make a finals series and almost 23 years to win their first finals game. So if you're looking at their history between 1967 to 2019, it's okay, it's not great, but from 2020 onwards I have to put them in elite, so Penrith Panthers definitely go in elite for me. Next team I'm putting in elite is Eastern Suburbs, or as they are known now, Sydney Roosters. This is another team where it's a bit of a no-brainer. They're one of the most successful clubs in the competition's history with 15 premierships. They're one of the most successful teams in the NRL ever with 4 premierships. They rarely miss the finals. They've finished as minor premiers on numerous occasions. They're very well run on and off the field. They managed to attract the best players. They managed to sign the best players, whether that be through their lucrative third-party agreements or some other means. They're very well run behind the scenes by some very smart businessmen, Nick Politis, Mark Burris, people like that. Also, they play in a brand new state-of-the-art stadium, the new Sydney Football Stadium, and once again they're another club that has a rich history as well. Back in the New South Wales Rugby League Premiership days, they'd won 11 premierships, which was I think the third most at the time. There was a little bit of a lull where they struggled to win a premiership sort of from the 70s to the early 2000s. They had a 27-year premiership drought, but once they broke that in the early 2000s, they've never really looked back. Some of the best players to have played the game have played for Easts, and they've always been one of them elite clubs. They've always been a club that sort of had a lot of financial power behind it, and yeah, they definitely deserve to be in the elite category. The third team I'm putting in this elite category is Melbourne. Since the end of the competition in 1998, they've won 4 premierships, contested numerous grand finals, and if they're not in the top 4 at the end of the year, there's alarm bells being raised. The club has only missed 2 final series in 25 years, and in those years I think they came 10th and 12th. They managed to attract the best talent, usually through other clubs or through their development systems. When it comes to developing players, they're one of the best at doing that. They're one of the best at taking players that might have a career where it's going one way, which is down, and they manage to grab them and pick them back up and turn their career around. They also develop players that are unknown into better players. Off the field, these days they run very well. Of course, the club will always be remembered for the salary cap scandal, where they were found guilty of breaching the salary cap between 2006 to 2010. I think there'll always be something that will be over the club. It'll be like a cloud over the club, but they don't seem too bothered by it. They play at a fairly new stadium down there in Melbourne, central Melbourne. It's only about 10-year-old, 12-year-old. In terms of membership, they've got one of the biggest memberships in the NRL. However, with some of their memberships, especially during COVID, they gave them out for free, so we don't really know how many paying members that they have. And in terms of attendances, their attendances are above average. They average between 16 to 20,000 a game. Every year there's always the question by some people when it's, how's this going to end? When's it all going to end for Melbourne? When are they going to miss the finals? When are they going to drop out? And every year they keep backing up and they keep turning up and they keep making the top four at very worst 5th or 6th place. And especially with Craig Bellamy there, it just appears that every year they just keep ticking over. And maybe when Craig Bellamy leaves, things might change. Maybe when some other players leave, things might change, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. And lastly, the final team that I'm going to put in the elite category is Brisbane. The club were founded in 1988, and within the first not even 20 years, they'd claimed 6 premierships, and 2 of them were back to back. The club is, in my personal opinion, the biggest in the NRL. They've got the biggest membership base. They have the biggest home attendance. In terms of financial and everything behind the scenes, they're probably the richest club in the NRL. They're one of the most marketable brands. They're one of the most well-known Australian sporting identities. They've had some great players come through their team. They've had Wayne Bennett as a coach for many years. They have a big talent pool and academy to pick from. They play at a world-class stadium at Suncorp Stadium there. There isn't too much bad to say about Brisbane in terms of their club. I've often called them the Manchester United of the NRL. This is back when obviously Brisbane were doing well, Manchester United were doing well at the same time, but the club is just a powerhouse. Of course, they have had 1 or 2 bad moments. I remember a long time ago they never missed finals, and when they finally didn't make the finals, it might have been 2011 or 2012, there was an inquest as to why they didn't make the finals. At the start of the 2020s, obviously they come last with the wooden spoon, which was, to me, unthinkable that a club the size of Brisbane could come last, but they did. But they've bounced back, and in 2023 they were runners-up in the grand final against Penrith, but certainly an elite club. Everybody out there pretty much knows that, whether you like to admit it or not. So that's my final club that I'll be talking about. So that is my video on the 17 clubs, ranking them from worst to best as organisations. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know in the comment section below. If you made it to the end of the video, congratulations. I know it's a very long video, apologies for that, but if I want to explain myself properly and I want to explain each club properly, I just can't do it in 15 to 20 minutes like the other YouTuber did. I have to explain it properly as to why I think a certain club is in a certain position. So it was quite a bit of effort to put this video together, but I hope you enjoyed it. And then, as always, this has been Rugby League History. Tatty bye for now.